Where have you noticed shrinkflation happening, and how does it make you feel as a consumer?
Mainly at my work. I work at Coles, so I know all about the down prices and all the gouging and stuff. Knowing I'm working at a place where they're actively ripping off so many people, it kind of just makes me a bit upset.
What's your biggest frustration with cost of living at the moment?
I mean, I suppose it just it makes everything so much more difficult. I don't know, I kind of enjoy the smaller things like buying coffees. It's $6. It's just not possible to do it weekly.
Has rising costs, have they changed your shopping habits at all?
They have, for sure. I only shop when everything's on sale. Not only in supermarkets, whenever I'm shopping for clothes as well, always waiting for sales to come out, otherwise everything gets too expensive.
How would you say the prices in general have affected you overall?
I think I guilt myself a lot over purchases that I make, especially more so now that when I feel like things are costing more. Even with necessities, even if it's something that I shouldn't, like groceries, I'll still feel guilty for buying them, which is stupid, obviously.
How do you kind of equate what something should be worth?
Yeah, well, either the service can be beautiful or the location itself doesn't have to be that I'm paying just for the actual goods. I'm very happy to pay for the service and the environment.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Holtain. I'm the Exec Director of the Victoria Law Foundation, and a very, very warm welcome to you in the room and online, wherever you may be, to our Law and You Forum for 2026. The price is wrong. Gouging, shrinkflation and the consumer law. It's fantastic to have you with us. But before we get this show underway and I introduce you to our outstanding talent, we would love you, whether or not you are in the room or online, to download the QR code behind me or on the screen if you're with us at home or in the office, perhaps, and answer a couple of questions. We want to know what you think. Is price gouging legal or illegal? Have you ever made a complaint about a product or a service and used your consumer rights? And which of these items before us on the table are the cheapest and the most expensive? We need you to put them in order. For those of you who are too young to remember The Price is Right, of which there are apparently now many, this is exactly what the game show used to be about. You had to order things from cheapest to most expensive. So we're asking you to do that with some consumer goods this evening, and you can do that on your Slido as well, which is also the place to drop your questions. So we will get to the questions in Slido as we can through the evening or towards the end. So please take a minute now to answer those questions and think very carefully about how expensive these items are. You might need to think about the volume. And I'm not sure we have was and now prices on them to indicate whether or not they've been downed. But we will reveal the answers on The Price is Wrong very shortly. But I take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting this evening and recognise their abiding connection to this land, its waterways and community. The officers of the Victoria Law Foundation and the Wheeler Centre, where we are this evening, are on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, with whom we co-wrote this acknowledgement of country. It's my privilege to pay respects to their elders and to all the generations of Wurundjeri people who have nurtured this land for over 60,000 years and continue to do so today. I also welcome and acknowledge elders and community members from other nations with us this evening and the custodians of country, wherever you may be joining us. We believe that acknowledging the past is an essential step in building a better and more equitable future. We recognise the impact of colonisation, its legacy of injustice, and the marginalisation of Wurundjeri and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Victoria Law Foundation aims to break down the barriers to justice for all Victorians through our work in research, education and grants. We are committed to making a sincere and positive contribution to a better justice system for all of us, especially those vulnerable and in most need. And as we're all trying to manage mortgage and inflation stress, petrol and energy prices, and supermarket bill shock, it is the right time to talk about what our consumer law covers, where it should go from here, and how we can make the most of it. What we do know from our public understanding of law research is that consumer issues are by far and away the highest proportion of legal problems in Victoria. 21% of all civil legal problems across the state are about goods and services and consumer issues. So that's 1.8 million problems over a 2-year period. That's staggering. So just let me paint you a little picture of what that data looks like. The highest proportion of those problems, consumer problems at 21% of the total, are defective goods. So dodgy things that you buy, lemon cars, all that kind of stuff. That's nearly 60% of consumer problems, followed by issues with tradespeople that clocks in at 20% of consumer problems, and then travel and entertainment services at 15%. So those are the top 3 areas where people register their concerns and their consumer problems or told us about them. And we know that probably the majority of those are resolved or abandoned without any kind of legal process. But we also know that around 20% of consumer problems last 5 years or more. So these are very common problems, and some of them are serious and very long-running and can cause, therefore, an awful lot of pain. So let's get into our discussion, and let me introduce you to our tour guides to the consumer law this evening. On the far side, Josh Barnes joins us. He is a senior financial counsellor at MELI, which is a not-for-profit community services agency based in Western Victoria. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we have in the middle Erin Turner, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Consumer Policy Research Centre. And closest to me, Tim Stargett, who is General Manager of Regulatory Strategy, let me get that right, Tim, at Consumer Affairs Victoria. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being with us at the Wheeler Centre. So we need to deal with our Slido questions first up and put people out of their misery on this. So Tim, I'm going to put the first question to you. In a recent poll, about 80% of polled Australians reckoned we're being gouged at the supermarket checkout. Is it illegal?
I will try to be brief, but I'm going to assume that we're in a room full of lawyers. So my first answer there will be, it depends. The issue that we run into, I think, with price gouging in first instance is probably definitional. What do we mean by price gouging? And that depends on, I think, individual perceptions of how much should I be paying for this or that, how much value am I getting from a product. When it comes to the illegality, I wouldn't necessarily say yes on its face. What I would look at when it comes to price gouging is what is the behaviours around what someone would call price gouging, particularly under, say, the Australian consumer law. Has there been a misleading or deceptive statement with respect to the product? Has there been some sort of unconscionable conduct with respect to the sale of the product? But if I was to say, is there a specific offence when it comes to price gouging? There's nothing particular that I can point to under, say, the Australian consumer law or any of our Victorian laws that I could say, yes, that makes price gouging illegal.
So our audience had it the wrong way round.
They had it the wrong way around, unfortunately.
61% of people thought that price gouging was illegal and 39% saying it wasn't. So
we may be aggrieved by
indeed,
price
the reality,
gouging,
exactly.
but unfortunately, what is it?
So basically you can charge what you want.
To a degree, and the market will decide, and there is conduct around how much you charge and obligations around that. But when it comes to something that someone would call price gouging, if a trader increases their prices and there is, say, a degree of elasticity around that price.
You're being very careful here, Tim. I love elasticity. We'll come back to Coles and Woolies later, I'm sure.
But on its face...
It's fundamentally not illegal.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yet.
Right, well, we might come back to that in due course too, Erin. But have you ever made a complaint? And if so, what about?
So I am a professional complainer.
Really? I would never have guessed.
I've worked as a consumer advocate in the not-for-profit sector, representing the interests of people, consumers, for closer to 2 decades than not, which is a long time now. But the side effect of this is that anytime my family members or friends have something go wrong, I get the quick message of, can I complain about this and how does it work? I have drafted many complaints.
Yeah.
I have one going at the moment, hopefully to be resolved tomorrow. And I think it's a really classic one that touches on the polls, the public understanding of law survey data. My TV died at 3 years. It does not turn on. And it was outside the manufacturer's warranty, that magic period of time where they say, we'll fix anything reasonable. But it's still covered under the Australian consumer law. So I have pushed and I've pushed and pushed. I've escalated my complaint. I've had to escalate right up to a tribunal, but then the business has told me that maybe they'll fix it for me. We'll see. Technically, I might have a repair tomorrow, so hopefully I'm good at complaining.
You need to let us know how the story ends. But I suppose the point is, you are very, very knowledgeable in this sector.
I know the magic words to use.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you can't get it done, what help the rest of us?
I think there is something here around the data again, the fact that complaints are running for 5 years. These are really simple, common problems. My TV doesn't turn on. My car is broken and it needs a repair. They shouldn't be so hard to resolve. And it points to some gaps where our consumer law, it might be good on paper, but it can be really hard to use.
Implement, indeed. More of that anon. Josh, you've got the toughest task of all, I think.
Yes,
so would you like to approach the table and put these goods in order? And I can just do the commentary. We have Milo, we have instant coffee, we have, what is that? Packet of chocolate chip biscuits. We've got some olive oil, we've got some nappies, and we have garlic bread. So there's dinner.
Cheapest to that end?
Yep. Yep, we'll go cheapest to most expensive. When was the last time you were in a supermarket?
Probably yesterday.
That's good.
Don't think about it.
Okay, which is going cheapest?
Cheapest, I think maybe that one.
All right, so garlic bread cheapest. Chocolate chip bickies second, then the Milo, then the coffee, and then the olive oil, and then the nappies.
I just remember them costing a lot.
Okay.
It might have been the frequency in which I had to buy them.
Yes, I think there is something around that. But you're happy with that decision?
Yeah, I think, Erin,
No, I don't.
yeah, we'll go with that.
And this is, I think, no, the crowd are running against you on the last two. Do you want to hold your position, or do you? Okay,
Yep.
right. I will give you the answers.
You'll
So,
move them as you...
yes,
Yep.
we will actually put the prices on the goods. So, can I give you the cards?
Sure.
$8 is your garlic bread, just the top one.
Top one.
$8.
$8 for the garlic bread. This is a bit terrifying, isn't it? Yeah. Choc chip bickies, $8.40. You are. Ooh. Interesting. You're going to have to move those nappies.
Oh. Okay.
They are baby love. Can I just say that? For those of us who've had to buy them in the past. $10.75 for the nappies, the bluey nappies. Whoops, sorry. Have I got that right? No, I've got that wrong. So can you? I was looking at the back of the wrong card. Do you want to read that one?
That's the Milo.
Milo.
Oh, yes.
So you had it nearly right. So Milo at $10.75. Nappies at $20. There we go. That's still pretty good for nappies. Coffee, guess?
I saw 23 there.
Yeah, $23.60. For your Makona, what's that, about 500 grams?
Yep.
And the olive oil is the most expensive at $27. So there we go. That is the price correct. Some would say it's still wrong, but that's what you're paying at the supermarket for a bundle of very common everyday purchases, and that's pretty terrifying.
I think we've got to do something about price gouging.
I still
Josh?
maintain if we bought Huggies nappies, I was right. I think.
Yeah, I think, yeah, fair enough. Your experience in terms of nappy brand,
Yeah.
which is an interesting point around, you know, whether or not that's having an impact on people's purchasing as well. Whether or not plain labels, all those sorts of things are now much, much more popular than they used to be, and that we've moved away from brands as a result of the higher pricing and cost of living pressures. But let's take a quick look at where we are in the landscape right now, because we hear about this, we saw it on the video, we're talking about it all the time. Like, I do have bill shock at the supermarket on a weekly basis, and I think, okay, what could I have taken out? What has pushed this to the point that it's at? So, Tim, are we seeing more pressure, more complaints, more feedback to Consumer Affairs about what people are dealing with?
Consumer Affairs would only see... We only see the complaints that are raised with us.
Yeah.
Now, that's not necessarily representative of what is the experience of consumers, because I think there is a degree of blindness when it comes to, well, what can be raised with a regulator. Looking at the complaint trends in Consumer Affairs Victoria, historically, residential tenancies complaints have been clearly the highest. Only recently has consumer complaints overtaken residential tenancies. Now, that is probably because there has been a decline in residential tenancies complaints, and there has been a gradual marginal increase
because of new residential tenancies legislation.
Perhaps,
yes, perhaps.
And the work of the Renting Task Force, which also falls within my remit. So, good work, Renting Task Force. So when it comes to what are we seeing in when it comes to consumer complaints, there's a whole range of matters that the Consumer Affairs focuses on. There have been, say, predatory practices by certain trades, dodgy tradies, locksmiths, plumbers, motorcar sales and motorcar complaints. And generally within the realms that CAV can regulate within, say, our licensed schemes. But when it comes to any changes in consumer complaints to us, as I said just before, I think that the issue is regulators only see a portion of what actually occurs. Government is responsive to matters that are raised in a policy context, and that's why we have things such as the Renting Task Force, the Underquoting Task Force, and more recently the announcement of the Fair Fuel Task Force. So government is responsive to issues that consumers are affected by, but that is from a policy perspective.
Yes, as opposed to the regulatory response that you see through complaints.
That's right.
Yeah. Josh, my hunch is that you would have a very clear handle in terms of what's happening on the ground as a financial counsellor. So are you seeing consumer issues on the rise?
Well, with consumer, if we identify a consumer issue, we'll generally have a secondary consult with CAV, and if there's a case there, we'll refer it on and they'll take over. Probably what I am seeing in my work is, as a financial counsellor, is people are just generally being priced out of life. So for the first time, I think we're starting to see a rise of people accessing the service that are employed, that are just not making ends meet, and there's no real inherent life event or change of circumstance that's triggered their need to access our service. Their money's no longer stretching far enough. And even sometimes as a financial counsellor, there's not a lot you can do in that situation because there's nothing, there's no specific issue that needs to be fixed. So that's really concerning to see people priced out of life that way. One of my colleagues ran an experiment not too long ago where she set up an online order from one of the supermarkets and she just hit order every week, week in, week out for 6 months.
Wow.
She obviously went and bought other things that she needed outside of that particular order, but that order alone rose by, I think from memory, that order alone rose $80 in 6 months from when she first started it.
So our experiment here is, our experience of thinking, geez, is that what that all costs?
Yeah, so that's $80 in 6 months. It was a bit
that's
scary.
Extraordinary. And she ordered exactly the same things week after week.
Yeah, that order never changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it increased by $80.
That's a neat experiment. Erin, you're in the policy space. So in terms of the sorts of pressures that Tim was describing and the way government responds or doesn't, what are you hearing and seeing that are the sort of hot button issues in consumer landscapes?
I think the general affordability problem is one I just want to echo and support that comment because it's and it's very interconnected. Housing prices are really high for people whether you have a mortgage or rental, and then that feeds in to pressures you face in the supermarket with car costs and everything else. When it comes to specific consumer problems, I think one of the challenges we have in policy is we don't always know the nature and the scope of these things. It's why data sources like polls and the work that we do at Consumer Policy Research Centre helps to fill those gaps. One of the things we're consistently finding is that across telecommunications issues, consumer law issues, if you have a problem, there's a good portion of people who do nothing about it. And one of the largest drivers of that is because they don't have faith. They don't believe that their problem will be addressed if they raise it. And that always scares me. We've got some data on that in renting, in telecommunications. There's some data coming soon, very soon, about the experiences Victorians have with the consumer law. And there's a lot of people who experience a problem, something breaks and they should be owed a remedy. And so many people don't make a complaint. We know from our past data, if someone goes to Consumer Affairs Victoria, they actually have a really great experience. So I want more people to use that service. But there are genuine challenges people face here. They have trouble resolving complaints using formal processes like a tribunal. Sometimes they're just inaccessible. They actually cost money to complain. And when you're trying to figure out, should I pay to have a complaint be made, you're doing maths in your head. The other big challenge we're seeing is timeframes. Right now, if you want to escalate a consumer problem through the VCAT, the Civil and Administrative Tribunal, the publicly stated time for you to get a hearing is 52 weeks.
That's a year.
It's a year, and that's just for the hearing to happen. So you've paid your $80 or whatever it is, depending on the value of the complaint, to say, okay, I've got something seriously wrong here. I need to escalate this complaint. You fill out a really complex legal form. You've got to wait 52 weeks and you have to have that product that whole time. That's your evidence. You've got to have your broken car that might still have debt attached to it. You might have to have that broken TV.
You might have to have a new car in order to get where you need to go.
Yeah. There's these really practical barriers that mean that even though we have rights on paper, they're not working in practice, particularly when you've got other stuff going on in your life.
And to add to that point, you alluded to before about like the broken TV that could take 3 years to get remedied, the car that could take 3 to 5 years. Now, if someone's entitled to that remedy, 3 years without a television, 3 years without a car, that's a long time to go. So the other thing we see is those complaints never get lodged. The client just goes and buys a new TV or goes and gets the car repaired.
Yeah, just
quite often doesn't have the funds and so then takes on unsecured debt in order to do it.
Okay, and then we're back in priced out of life territory.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Oh my God. Okay, so let's talk about what is on paper, to use your phrase, Erin. What is the structure around our consumer law? What does it look like? Because we have a divided system. Tim, we've got federal legislation under the Australian consumer law. We have the ACCC and the federal bodies which are both regulatory and sort of they take action, as we've recently discovered, in very graphic detail against supermarkets. And then we have Consumer Affairs Victoria, which deals in different territory, is that right? How does the state-fed thin split?
Very similar territory. So the divide is there's an agreement between the regulators, but it is a shared jurisdiction between the Commonwealth and the various states and territories. So the ACCC does have a broad concern over consumer and competition. So they look at the overall state of markets and the ebb and flow of that, and the way that, say, major players such as Coles and Woolworths may behave within those markets. Consumer affairs and our other state and territory counterparts, we are more concerned with the affairs of consumers. It's in the name. And so consumers can raise complaints directly with us, say, where there is an issue with consumer guarantees or products or services that have been provided by whomever is supposed to provide a service, such as a tradie or a plumber or a locksmith. And so we do support consumers in those matters, but yes, as you say, it is a divided jurisdiction.
Yeah. And then we have a whole lot of complaints bodies, like, you know, you can make a complaint to CAV, but you can also go to an ombudsman, utility ombudsman, telecommunications ombudsman, Victorian ombudsman, if it happens to be a government issue. So there are that sort of cluster, if you like, of complaints bodies, and the financial AFCA, which stands for exactly what, Josh, can you recall?
Australian Financial Complaints Authority.
There you go, it's pretty straightforward, really. And then there's ASIC, which also has a sort of national responsibility for the behaviour of corporations in the marketplace. So it's a pretty crowded space and very confusing. So do I go to ASIC or AFCA? Do I go to the ACCC or CAV? Erin, tell me.
I feel like in my side gig as a professional complainer, this is the question I'm always answering for people. Just where do I go?
Where do I go?
And what magic words do I use? Do I say that this company misled me, or do I say that my consumer guarantees are breached? This is, do you know what? I'm often using the information from CAV or the ACCC, who have great guides. That's my if you don't know, start there. And Choice's website, choice.com.au, is also really useful. But in terms of where to go, it depends. The first thing, like the easy answer is the first thing you raise it with the business. Go, hey, this is not working, this is wrong, something, I would like to see something fixed, go there first. Not a lot of people have love at that stage, and that's why we have these escalation bodies. And you end up with the specialty options. So some industries, the ombudsman model is where, you know, if you've got an issue with telecommunications, energy companies, or financial services, you can make a free complaint to an ombudsman, and it will be resolved for you. Ideally, you can run that through to a resolution that's binding on the company, but you can always go to court if you're not happy with it. So it's a really flexible option for consumers. If anything falls outside of that, then think about your other complaints options. State and territory fair trading bodies often have a source of help, and they can be really practical. They can poke the business to get them to do a little bit more. I'm sure Tim can talk about that. And then actually where you go from there depends. It's different in every state and territory. It's this hodgepodge. This is the broken complaint system. In Victoria, we've got a tribunal, but if you're in WA, you don't. You've only got magistrates court. Other states might have a tribunal that doesn't cover consumer complaints and may take some depending on the issue. South Australia is a really mixed bag. It's so dependent on where you are and what the problem is, and that makes it really hard to navigate.
Why do you live in Albury-Wodonga?
Exactly. What if you're on the border? Do you go to NCAT? What if the business is in Albury and you're in Wodonga? These things can fall outside, and sometimes even we've seen cases where tribunals say, oh, we can't deal with that because that business is out of territory. And that leaves you just going, oh gosh, there's nowhere for me to turn. This complaints problem, I think, is one of the things we really need to get on top of to make our consumer rights real.
So Tim, CAV also has its regulatory function, and that's your specific bailiwick. But what role do regulators play in improving life for consumers? Because I think it's sort of at one remove. It's not the complaints function, but you are trying to influence market behaviour, I suppose, to put it that way.
Yeah, there are a few layers that I would probably pitch that, because there is that entry level that Erin was referring to. Say you have raised a complaint with a trader or a body that's supposed to owe you a guarantee with respect to a product, And a point of escalation is Consumer Affairs, and we have a thing called a frontline resolution body that can help with conciliating a dispute or with a trader. But as matters rise, they are then referred on to other parts of CAV. Let's say there's a clear breach of obligations that occurred. It can be escalated to our investigations and compliance, or one of our task force teams to then investigate the matter and then potentially take compliance and enforcement action for a breach of one or more consumer laws. But when it comes to that point that you raise about the role of the regulator, it's what I would call the regulatory shadow. We seek to influence behaviours within markets. So let's say we have in the realm of underquoting. So in the property market, something that affects cost of living, say the cost of houses, the way that properties are priced or the pricing is estimated can influence, say, the price that you offer for a property, and that can change the ebb and flow of the prices within that market. We have the underquoting task force that does work there to target that practice of underquoting, but a team of the number that the underquoting task force is can only do so much. So what we seek to do through our regulatory influence is be seen within markets. See that we can affect behaviours, that if behaviour doesn't change or accord with how we expect it to, we can and will take action against non-compliance.
So when you say be seen in markets, what do you mean? Show up to auctions?
There's a whole range of that of visibility that where we can be seen.
And do you wear a CAV hat, like an FBI jacket?
We have CAV branded polo shirts,
right?
And we're about to put in the order for some caps and some vests.
So bulletproof.
For the underquoting task force and the renting task force, they do seasonal blitzes where they are physically at auctions or at rental inspections where they are seen, where people can see that they are out in the field inspecting compliance or non-compliance, as the case may be. And then when we take regulatory action, being, say, a court-based action or infringements, we want to see that there is a general and specific deterrence impact of an action that we have.
So what sort of enforcement do you have? Because I really want to get back to Coles and Woolies, but because we don't know what that fine will be as we speak tonight. But there certainly has been mutterings from the chair of the ACCC that will be a very significant fine and could have really, therefore, fairly profound impact. But what sort of, if you take a company to court over their misbehaviour, say real estate or whatever, what can you get from them? So what's the remedy?
There's two good examples that have come out of the task forces. In the underquoting task force, there was one real estate agent that was found to have engaged in pretty egregious underquoting practices, and court action was commenced against them. More recently, there was a settlement in that matter for $600,000 against that real estate agent. So, in the realms of real estate agencies and the amount of money that they can make, you could say, well, that isn't a lot, but it is a significant amount for a trader that that was found to have been engaged in underquoting. But there is also that regulatory shadow that I mentioned previously, that particular agency is now tarred with having engaged in underquoting and having to have paid $600,000 to the state. Another more recent example when it comes to renting is there was a particular rental provider that was engaged, that had unfair terms in their rental agreements and engaged in failures to comply with the minimum standards. They paid a $1 million penalty to Consumer Affairs for their unfair terms and failing to meet the minimum standards. That is a major penalty that then has an impact on their share cost because they had to publicise it. The penalties that they pay is not the only penalty that they incur.
It's reputational damage.
It's reputational.
Yeah. Which I want to come back to because it seems to me that the media has an interesting role to play in this. But let's talk Coles and Woolies because we all want to. So, Aaron, can you very briefly set out exactly what they did?
lied to us about whether things are on discount.
Well, they put them on discount, but not for they raised the price and then dropped it, and all those timelines.
Dog food's the example that's stuck in my mind.
Okay.
So it was $4, and then it went up to, I think it was about $6 or $6.50. And then very, very quickly, it went down to $4.50. So, there wasn't long. It was, I think, 10 days where it was at that higher price. And they advertised that this is a discount, this is special. When $4.50 is a lot more than $4. And they did this across their range. So I think it's worth keeping in mind the kind of harm we're talking about here. It's not the 50 cents. It's the fact that it's not dog food alone. It's, your cereal, your milk, your bread. It's across your supermarket shop. That means you're paying $80 more over 6 months. And you think you're getting a good deal. So specifically what they took court action against Coles for was using the misleading and deceptive provisions in our Australian consumer law. You can't lie to customers. And they can face really significant fines here. Fines have gone up since this court case for the action, but for the dates that this activity occurred, it can be up to $50 million per breach. It's now as high as $100 million per breach. That's the top end. So there could be something really significant.
Yes, although there are those who would say this is the cost of doing business, and for Coles and Woolworths, 50 mil. Yeah.
There are two other limbs to the penalty provision, which I quite like. It's either now $100 million, 30% or 3 times what the company made from that action. So if they made $100 million, it could be $300 million, or 10% of turnover calculated in a certain period. They're nice and significant pieces, but I think Tim's right in that the fine is only one component of this penalty. Yep. We've also got to think about, is this going to lead to anyone getting their money back? I hope the judgment considers that, and I hope the ACCC pushes for that, some sort of consideration of, people lost money, they were misled. What are people getting back out of this? Or what can Coles do to make that right? And what kind of public role is there to make sure everyone knows about this, the reputational damage?
I don't know if we can answer this, but it's a very good question. How Aldi manages to keep its prices down where Coles and Woolies don't. Do we have any insight into that?
So this is, I think, where the magic of competition comes in, because...
The Aldi effect.
The Aldi effect. Aldi internationally, when there is an Aldi in your area, the prices drop. Or overall, and also it's cheaper to shop. But Aldi Choice has done supermarket surveys on this for years, and the results are really clear. I think there is this genuine question around whether the major supermarkets are price gouging, and as in, very hard to define legally, but charging more than a reasonable amount of profit. What is reasonable? What is profit? Lots in there legally. There's actually a new legal framework coming in. It's not here yet, but it will come in from July. And I'd say it's...
July next year.
Oh, July next year.
2027.
2027. It's experimental, I'd say, even internationally. It only applies to the 2 major supermarkets, very large supermarkets, the 2 majors. And they won't be allowed to charge excessive or unreasonable prices for groceries, which is what it costs them plus a reasonable profit. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but it could help deal with some of this.
Sorry, I think it's talking about unfair trading practices. You may be right.
Yes, the supermarket stuff is July this year. Unfair trading is a different law reform that I'm very excited about.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that, no doubt. But Josh, we were talking before we came on stage about buy now, pay later schemes, and the fact that people are using those and encouraged to do so to buy groceries, which chills me, I have to say. But that goes to the picture that you're painting around people's levels of stress and desperation. So when we're having to literally split payments for our groceries every week in order to manage it and to engage with various different buy now, pay later operators, that indicates a very serious level of financial distress.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to clients, if you're using credit to purchase regular and ongoing transactions, then we've got an issue there that we need to resolve. Where I think a consumer falls over is it gets to a point they're desperate, particularly when they've got kids to feed and things like that. So they need those groceries whether they can afford them or not, and temporarily in the moment. A buy now, pay later product resolves that situation, but there's not a lot of thought for next week and the week after, because in 2 weeks' time, the payments, the first of 4 instalments is due. That falls on top of
This week's groceries.
this week's groceries. And, you know, so the situation, whilst there's an immediate relief, it only compounds more and more and more. And they're trapped in that debt spiral. And they can use buy now, pay later to buy just about anything.
Yes, yes.
Or pay for anything.
You are our image of sunshine and roses at the end there, Josh, in terms of the reality that you're describing. But I want to just hop back to that point about the media, because we talked about, you know, the sort of reputational impact, the regulatory shadow, which is a very fine image in my mind. But Erin, is it the case that something going viral online is as good as any regulator or legal action? I mean, in terms of reputation, it's pretty fast and very effective.
It can be. And I think the factor behind that is, does that business care about its reputation? There are some businesses that do not, and they are much harder. That's where regulators really need to step in and I think take great, strong legal action. But we've seen, actually I'm going to use an example from the New South Wales counterpart, New South Wales Fair Trading. They do something really great, which is they name any business that has received 10 or more complaints to them every month. There's a list, it's a name and shame list, and media often picks it up. And there are businesses that have moved themselves off that list because they're like, oh no, we don't want to be on the shame list. And it's a great example of where you see change in business activity because media and a regulator are calling out that bad behaviour.
Yeah, in sync.
Yeah.
With the reputation damage for me can be quite challenging. Coles and Woolies is a great example. I mean, you go out in some of our regional remote communities, you might only have one, not both. But when you've really only got to choose between two, people are very forgiving, and we still need to go do our grocery shopping at the end of the day. So they can get charged their fine, they can apologise. We're there next week. So they know, they have a good understanding of what they can and can't get away with a lot of the time, just by virtue of our necessity to continue to access or utilise their service or buy their product. So it's all, in my mind, factored in to a lot of this behaviour.
We talk a lot, and I'm taking a bit of a detour here, but I think it's worth exploring. We talk a lot in Australia about the fact that we're a small market. We're only 28 million, and therefore we only have 2 major supermarkets, 2 airlines-ish sometimes, 1 major DIY gardening store because competition against them has failed. So are we ever going to get big enough? And what is big enough to break out of this duopoly or monopoly situation where, as Josh has described, we are forced to return again to the poorly behaved retailer because we don't have any other options?
I feel like this is such a good question because it's a lot of our laws and protections assume that we're working towards competition and that if we just get enough players in the market, it's all going to sort itself out. Businesses will treat us fairly, it's going to be great, they'll compete on price. And I think there are two reasons that doesn't happen. One is Australia is a small market and we end up with large dominant players, often the players who've had an advantage by, once in their history they were a government-run agency. You've got a government-run bank that's now a major bank, an ex-government-run telecommunications company that's now a major telco.
And an airline.
And an airline, exactly. They've got advantages that they've kept over time. But the other factor we can't forget is that our world is now large and digital. And rather than, I think the hope of the internet age was that we'd see this flourishing competition, we're actually seeing significantly more concentration and power in the hands of very few, very large businesses. Our theory that competition will fix this, I don't think it stacks up for Australia, and I think it increasingly doesn't stack up internationally. So it's where we need to, I think particularly for something where it's an essential service, we need this to live. We need better regulations and better protections for people to say, actually, no, we expect better standards of behaviour. Competition isn't, in my view, was always meant to be a means to an end. It was meant to get us good, fair prices, fair treatment. Companies will fix something when something goes wrong. And if competition isn't delivering that, that's where we need different laws and protections.
And it's competition is outside the realms of CAV. We're a consumer regulator, not a competition regulator. So it's sort of my own views here. But I think it's a bit of a myth that we tell ourselves. It's probably a bit of a cultural cringe that Australia is a small market.
Yes, well, this is my point. How big do we need to be to be not a small market anymore?
That's right. We are not a small market when it comes to the size of our economy and our turnover. We are among the significant middle players of the globe. And yet we have a small market mindset. We permit these major retailers to be so dominant. I think so. Our laws appear to be geared towards the assumption of competition that Erin was talking about, but I think that assumption of competition isn't necessarily taking into account the historical context of some of these businesses. They established a foothold within their markets in very different legal and economic contexts. And then when they have the benefits of a free market competitive policy and disposition, that enables them to be quite dominant within that market. And that's where I think we need to sort of recalibrate our policy settings to think, is this, taking into account the reality of these markets, are our policy and legal settings actually meeting the needs of consumers and the markets that we are actually operating in, and also the global market that we're operating in. There is a high degree of monopolisation, not just, say, in say certain hardware and homewares or supermarkets. It's also in social media and it's in online platforms. The internet has moved towards a mindset of monopolisation and major players. So that's probably something that we need to think about a bit more in a policy setting.
Josh?
And competition can be very misleading in the marketplace, and insurance is one that comes to mind for me. When I attended a disaster recovery hub recently after some fires and whatnot, I expected to walk in and see a plethora of insurance companies being represented because there's just so many in the marketplace. There was 3.
Is that because they just ate each other?
They own each other.
3,
so you've you've really got 3 main players in the industry. You've got Hollards, AIG, and Suncorp. But the brands that each of those those providers or underwriters own is phenomenal. So consumers can quite easily think that each individual brand is each individual business. Those 3 companies pretty much own the whole market.
I've noticed that in health insurance as well.
Banking's the same.
And banking, you've got different brands and sub-brands.
Well, you can go to Rams, for example, and think you're getting independent, unbiased advice. It's owned by Westpac. Last I knew, Aussie Home Loans, CBA had a fair chunk of ownership in Aussie Home Loans. So very misleading, in my opinion. What's competition and what's not.
Okay, that's really interesting, and whether or not there's a regulatory or legislative response to that kind of branding. I mean, it strikes me that it might be rather similar to the price gouging question. It's not on its face illegal to set up a sub-brand, but it does have the effect of actually misleading people into believing that there is a separate business and that it's an independent, or it might be smaller and more caring, or whatever the image is that they're trying to project.
And while it may be misleading about the what is the corporation behind the corporation?
Yes.
What is the harm when it comes to the consumer? And that harm may be a bit more. It's indirect. The harm to the consumer isn't necessarily in when it comes to this question a direct financial detriment that you can easily quantify. This thing is going to be more expensive than that. It goes to the behaviour of markets and the way those markets affect consumers' ability to maximise their utility.
So we're late-stage capitalism. Should we just call it that and move on?
But even with the insurance one, I find really interesting. You can have a disagreement with that insurance company, like whoever you access your insurance through, and you can go, right, that's it. I'm going to protest with my money. I'm going to take my money somewhere else. You go and get a quote at a different insurance company. Your money still flows back to the same company in the background.
Yeah.
So where's the incentive for them to play nice? Because if you ultimately end up with a different market face, so to speak, they're still getting your money.
Oh dear. Okay. I want to answer some questions around where we go for help and how we actually respond to the sorts of problems that Victorians are telling us they've got. So, dodgy products, is that a CAV problem?
CAV can help with dodgy products. A great example more recently was Pandamart, where it was a major retailer that had several thousand products, dangerous products, taken off their shelves. So
they're an online.
No, Pandamart they had I think 2 shops here in Victoria, discount products.
Okay.
So dodgy
Clearly
products,
I'm not in the right demographic for this.
dangerous products taken off the shelves. But if you have a product concern, including a guarantee issue, a complaint, you start with the trader. But CAV is where you can go for assistance.
Thank you very much for that. Dodgy tradies, where do we go?
CAV.
CAV. Okay, is CAV the answer to everything?
Oh,
not everything.
Sure.
but we'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge, from the data we did some research in 2023, people who made it to CAV genuinely said they felt heard, they felt like their issue progressed, several people resolved their complaints. If you can, start with Consumer Affairs Victoria, but if the company doesn't want to engage in that conciliation, you can then hit a brick wall. And then that escalation point is to the tribunal, the 52-week wait for a consumer hearing.
Okay, and our third and final contender in the top 3 is entertainment and travel. And I think what is captured in that is things like dodgy tickets or tickets to flights or tickets to events that don't match what was promised. Cav?
I haven't seen these types of complaints, but I would think possibly.
Or the TIO, if it's
a telecommunications issue.
Yeah.
There's also, we're not there yet. It's currently being considered by government. We're kind of in final stages, but there will soon be an airline ombudsman, which is fantastic. There's something that calls itself like an airline complaints resolution body. Really, it's an email forwarding services. They don't have the ability to decide your complaint, but they're setting up an ombudsman in this space because so many people have had problems that it's caused by 2 companies. An ombudsman is a really good solution for this.
So let's go to that, because Europe has a very impressive regime certainly around flights, and the compensation you get and the accommodation that will be paid for if your flights are delayed and all that sort of stuff. Is that where we're headed or not that far? Erin's swooning at the prospect.
I've written a report on this in previous roles in my life, rattling around the consumer sector for a while, as you're probably picking up. So the European system is fantastic if you haven't experienced it. If your flight is delayed by a certain number of hours, you get money. If it's cancelled, you get a certain amount of money. In some cases, it can be worth it for you, depending what you need to travel for. But really what it does is it incentivizes airlines to fly on time more. It means that fewer flights are delayed for reasons within the airline's control. So it fixes the bigger problem, as well as putting people back in the position they should have been in. And they can buy a sandwich in the airport if they need to.
A grossly overpriced sandwich,
yes.
no doubt.
Look, technically we should have access to these rights. It's one of the challenges with, I think, our Australian consumer law is it's really principled. Our Australian consumer guarantees, so your right to a refund, repair or replacement if something goes wrong, and there's some nuances in there. It should cover you if a flight's delayed. These apply to airlines, and they should be compensating you reasonably if there's a significant delay and giving you refunds if they can't get you from A to B in a reasonable period. They fight you all the way, though. And those our law is expressed in these big principles around reasonableness, whereas in the European rights framework for travel, it's so black and white and easy to understand. There's pros and cons to it, but it means that, again, it can be really hard to enforce in Australia. I'm waiting for that ombudsman.
So has it made a difference in Europe? Do the planes run on time?
Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't say it's universally, there'll be still some countries where there's some delays. You might expect to be on a sunny beach for a little bit longer. That's okay. But largely it's improving flight times compared to Australia.
So it does have the impact that was intended of improving corporate behaviour.
Yeah, and people get their money back, which is sadly not what we saw in Australia during COVID. A lot of people got vouchers and vouchers that, until consumer advocates kicked up a huge stink, were going to expire. There were groups of people who would never have been made right.
Yeah, it goes on and on. Another really interesting question around the use of AI in complaining. So have you seen Claude and ChatGPT sort of formulated responses coming through to CAB?
Not that we've detected.
There is an app for that.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we have received some AI-assisted complaints. I think that when it comes to the use of AI by government, I think with so many technologies, government close your ears is notoriously slow in some of these things. I wouldn't be surprised if the use of AI to assist complaints is something that we will see, and then the use of AI to help assess them. An issue when it comes to use of AI by government is the obligations that apply to us when it comes to exercising administrative obligations.
And discretion.
That's right. When say you raise a complaint with government, or government makes a decision that's going to affect you, and you decide to challenge it on administrative grounds and a discretion is exercised, government has to be able to explain why it didn't make a decision that affected you. If it said, well, we used AI to help us make that decision, how would you respond? Is that a sufficient justification or reason for us to actually make a decision that is going to affect you? Would you be satisfied that the reasoning that we used was sufficient?
No.
No, and I don't think these days a court would agree to the use of AI in those circumstances. So while y'all as consumers are free to use AI to make complaints to us, we will still be relying on good old-fashioned humans.
Good. I'm relieved to hear that. Josh, are people using it to consider their financial positions? Is AI being, in your experience? Yeah, put in your household budget and...
Quite possibly, yep. Well, yeah, they are. I mean, I've seen media coverage of people, using it to adjust their share portfolios and things like that. So, and I know of a book around investing that talks about running filters like parameters through AI to stock select and things like that. So yeah, I don't know of anyone personally or any clients that use it, but I have no reason to think that they wouldn't be using it.
There's a chill that runs through my heart though at the prospect of putting any kind of personal financial data into an AI tool.
I guess it depends if it's closed source or open.
Yes.
That's the issue. But finance companies, I'm utterly convinced that finance companies are using them, using AI in their responses. Like when I'll put through a hardship request or something like that, you can almost predict what the response is going to be in terms of the offer. And the wording of the email and everything like that. So I'm utterly convinced that...
So the algorithmic response.
Yeah, basically. A lot of the time that first level complaint, I'm talking with the chatbot. A lot of the time it's not until I escalate that I'll then sort of get to a real person.
Actually, this is going to be coming through in our data we're releasing soon from Victorian consumer experiences. We're seeing a lot of businesses that don't have a way for you to talk to a person, and it's really affecting people's trust that their complaint's going to be heard. They're feeling really railroaded by those AI complaint bots because they give you these answers that don't always... I mean, I've seen some that are effective, but a lot of them are giving you these like irrelevant or cookie cutter answers. They're not resolving your complaint. And I think it's leading to complaint fatigue, people giving up and not progressing with getting their problem solved.
I'm wondering too, though, if there is a backlash against that, because I've seen or heard on the phone more people lately. So I don't know if that's having any resonance, or maybe it's just the companies I've been dealing with. But they in the past, where you would sort of sit on hold and have to sort of speak your problem and wait for some kind of response, I'm now getting through to people a lot more quickly, and maybe there's a response to that notion of, I'm not speaking to the bot anymore. And if you put me through this, then I will take my business elsewhere. But as you say, Josh, I'm just going to take it to another of your sub-brands, you know.
That's right.
No doubt. But how do we compare? I mean, we've talked a wee bit about airlines, but how do we compare internationally on the broad kind of consumer protection front? Tim, have you got a sense of what the rest of the world gets that we don't, or what we've got that they haven't?
Not specifically myself, unfortunately, having only been in the consumer realm for a fraction of the time that Erin has. I mean, to come back to that point of principle, like, what I can do is say compare jurisdictions within Australia.
Yep.
And principally the Commonwealth jurisdiction versus what's going on here in Victoria. We've mentioned the Australian consumer law and how that's very principles-based. And I love a principles-based law. I used to work an awful lot in the Fair Work Act and in industrial relations legislation, very principles-based. But as Erin said, principles-based legislation can only get you so far if you don't decide to test it and push the boundaries of those principles to determine where they lay. And for individual consumers, that can be very, very difficult to do. Victoria, by comparison, has quite prescriptive consumer legislation. So let's look at the residential tenancies legislation or the underquoting legislation. And where we have that quite prescriptive law, depending on how it's drafted, it can be quite actionable. And it can make significant differences within those markets. So while that isn't necessarily a international versus Australia or Victoria, it always depends on how your specific law is drafted and the principles behind why it's drafted that way. Erin may have further insights in international comparisons.
One of my favourite things I get to do is talk to the equivalent of my organisation internationally. Zoom calls, lots of late night Zoom calls because we're in Australia. Broadly, I'd say I often want their consumer laws, but they want our regulators. Yeah, I think our consumer law is improving. We're actually about to get some reform through. It's sitting in the Federal Senate to introduce a ban on unfair trading, and I'm so excited. It's a big gap. Right now, under our consumer law, companies can't lie to you, mislead or deceive, and they can't behave unconscionably, which is a very high legal bar, and this fills the middle. It says a company can't treat you unfairly. Now, for contrast, that law has been in place for decades in the US. It's in Singapore, the EU, the UK. We've been missing that for a long time. We're playing catch up on that front. But when I talk to consumer advocates in other countries, quite often their regulators aren't testing law. They're not taking those cases to understand how the principles apply. And they see the ACCC or CAV or other state and territory regulators take action, and they want what we've got. So we've got some advantages.
Josh, you were a banker.
Yes.
So when it comes to how Australian financial regulation and consumer protection works, how do you think we rate?
Well, I never quite made it to Wall Street, so I don't know what it looks like over there. But my time in banking, you saw more and more regulation come in. Then we had the Royal Commission. I'm not a fan of the Royal Commission. I think in some ways it actually made the finance sector worse.
How did it do that?
I think there was a series of unintended consequences. You know, there were some introductions like credit reporting and credit scoring and things like that. What I've noticed in my role now as a financial counsellor post-Royal Commission is it just gave birth to a whole new industry of lenders that, you know, the banks complied, did the right thing by and large, and I find the big fours are generally really, really good to deal with. It's when we get outside of the big fours and we get into the second and third tier lenders that we have the issues. And those second and third tier lenders, in my experience, their whole business model is around sort of how do we sort of get around these new laws and regulations, you know. So we'll create a whole business model where we'll lend to people with poor credit history, or we'll lend to people with low credit scores, and we'll actually make that vulnerable customer our whole business model. That, you know, they've been locked out of mainstream lending as a result of the changes that the Royal Commission brought in. But then we've got the next tiers that have sprung up.
So proliferation of dodginess.
Yeah, and they just go, well, that's okay. We're going to ignore the credit score. We're going to ignore the prior credit history. We're going to come up with some creative credit assessment criteria. and we're just going to charge exorbitant interest rates, exorbitant fees, and we are a country built on credit. We rely on credit for our whole economic system's founded by credit, sort of rather than cash. And I think consumers have just come to the point where they just accept it. They just accept, okay, I'm going to have to pay that rate. I'm going to have to pay those fees if I want what it is that I want. Classic example is that unsecured loan for the $5,000 car repairs that I don't have. I need the car back on the road. I've got to get to work. I've got to get kids to school. I've got to do the shopping. I cannot wait 5 years for this to go through VCAT, etc. I'm just going to get the loan. Okay, it's going to be 25%. Okay, so be it. And away they go. They're desperate. The Big Four will say, well, sorry, you don't meet our lending criteria. That's
so
okay.
They end up somewhere else.
Down and down the line until they find someone. Yeah. So the unintended consequence for me was just a second and third tier in credit industries
Sprung up like
that
weeds
sprung up
between the pavers.
taking advantage of the vulnerability.
So is there a way to regulate that? I mean, or are there always going to be novel responses which get around these particular responses?
There is a report on the CPRC website about how to regulate this.
Fancy that.
Very specifically, we've looked at mortgages. One of the challenges we've got with this is that you've got your Credit Act. We've talked about the messiness of the consumer law. Financial consumer protections are even worse. They sit across the Insurances Act, the Asset Act, the Credit Act, the Corporations Act. And underneath that, there's more regulation. And underneath that, there's still a lot of industry self-regulation and codes. So what are my rights is a really hard question to answer. And what do I do about it is even harder. Although, go to AFCA. But when it comes to a lot of those protections for people who are getting credit, they sit in industry codes. And the Big Four actually have a pretty good code. I think there's room for improvement, but it's actually pretty strong. It means that when something goes wrong, they're going to help you largely. Customer-owned banks are currently reviewing their code. It's okay, it could improve. And then there's a group of banks, the AFIA code, and it's the weakest of all. We've put them side by side. And then there's some banks that aren't even covered by any codes. So there's no rules about how they'll treat you if you lose your job or you're in hardship and you seek a financial counsellor. So we've just got this hodgepodge inconsistency, and lifting all lenders up to a basic standard that says, when something goes wrong, we'll treat you with this level of respect. That would be such a bare minimum great requirement that means that we can trust that when we get credit, we're not going to be at a real loose end if something goes wrong.
I have realised that I have failed to address one of the key questions that we have put this evening, which is shrinkflation. Because we have an outstanding question. I love the way this has been put. What can be done about shrinkflation's evil stepsister, planned obsolescence? So, so we're once again in the dodgy product domain, because for those of us who understand fully what planned obsolescence is, I think you're experiencing it with your television, Erin.
I am experiencing it. All right, planned obsolescence, when companies design things that fail too soon. I used to work at Choice, and we constantly got these letters from people who they'd been members for 50 years and they've had the same washing machine. I've gone through washing machines every 4 or 5 years. I don't know what I'm doing. Probably I'm pressing the wrong buttons. But things aren't lasting as long as they used to, and you're not imagining it. We have some general protections under our consumer law, but they're not really specific enough to go to this. There are some amazing protections all around right to repair, which planned obsolescence is part of it. There's great reforms happening in Canada, in the US, across the EU and UK, and we want to see them here in Australia. We don't have the momentum on this yet. I want to do this. I love the questioner who asked this, because this is one of my absolute hobby horses. We are missing these protections to get our products repaired and to make them last longer in Australia.
Can I just say hallelujah for whoever forced through, and whichever jurisdiction it was internationally, the universal plug for mobile phones.
Yeah,
that was the EU. Yeah. But on to that point, the obsolescence isn't just, say, the electronic goods that we see with televisions and washing machines and fridges. One of the prime examples is, like you mentioned, phones. Very, very expensive products that we turn over very, very regularly. The obsolescence is in the latest software update that you may receive. A great example is I think the largest one of the largest phone producers, if not the largest phone producer, rolled out an update to an affected version 12 of the phone. There were significant slowdowns in the phone's performance.
So that was absolutely intentional?
Not necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily ascribe intentionality to it. I'm merely describing the effect.
You're being careful and I'm not. But, you know, it had the impact
it absolutely had the impact.
Performance.
And so when it comes to the electronic products that are so prevalent and that we rely on so regularly, the obsolescence can occur within a single software update. And going back to that, to the principles-based legislation that we exist under in Australia, as I said before, the boundaries of those principles when it comes to the obsolescence here haven't been tested. And in the absence of right to repair and the extension of that to, say, software updates, we have some spongy rights around that could still be tested, that it may apply, but we just haven't pushed it.
Oh, I want the CAV case on this.
I might refer this to that soon.
But there's been some really interesting reforms to pick this up. One of the ones I love in Europe, there has to be a disclosure of how long products will give you software updates, essential security software updates. So you can see it when you buy. This phone will be updated for the next 5 years, this for the next 2, this for the next 10. And it's steering behaviour. We're seeing better products, as well as people have that individual power to choose something that's going to last longer.
You need that info up front.
You need it when you're shopping.
Yes, exactly. So I need to know that this product will be updated or not over a certain period of time. I mean, as you said, Tim, phones are horrendously expensive and absolutely essential. And I suppose, Josh, I'm looking at you and thinking that's yet another nail in the coffin of people who are already financially stressed. And this is an essential service now. Is that an issue too that you encounter in terms of your financial counselling life, that people have to have the car, they have to have the mobile, and that has a real bearing on their capacity to afford the rest of their life?
Well, yeah, it does, because it all adds up. You know, with every, a phone's a monthly bill. Probably for me, the other concern I have is when I work with clients is just how many different devices they have. Like, I've got an iPhone and I've got an iPad and I've got something else, and they all really, by and large, essentially do the same thing. But we've got to have one of everything, and that's all rolled into one plan, and then all of a sudden it's, you know, it's some of the telecommunication plans I see on a monthly basis are huge, and you think, well, we need to cut out some of the devices, you know.
How does that go down?
Tricky, because you've got to, we like to sit in a non-judgmental space, so I'm not there to tell people how to spend their money, but we can certainly have conversations that you try and steer so that the client goes, well, maybe I don't need, maybe that iPhone just does what the iPad does, and I've only got it for the bigger screen, and maybe I can do away with that. Or subscription services are another great example of that. I mean, they add up and add up and add up, you know, so a lot of work is around cutting those down as well.
Yes.
So,
how much TV
but
can
I
you
think
watch?
I think it's been this subtle change where for a long time you used to pay for something up front, and a lot of businesses now have moved to subscription models. And an individual subscription doesn't look like much, you know, $12.99 for Netflix. Doesn't look like much. But then, so when you're making that purchase decision, you're looking at it individually. You're not going, well, how many services am I currently paying for? Or how many subscriptions do I currently have? You're just looking at that one in isolation and you're going, yeah, I can afford that. But not when you extrapolate it out across the sheer volume that you have. And every business is going to that model because it's just much more cash flow.
Locks people in.
Cash flow, and it locks them in. It's cash flow sustainable. That's the big hurdle.
So a friend of mine was telling me recently how many subscriptions she is currently party to, and I'm not talking streaming. She buys her coffee and her, you know, deodorant and her, you know, very many other products, toilet paper. All of these things come automatically as part of her subscription, whether or not she's actually running out of those products or not. She's stockpiling. But that, as you say, that's a really interesting shift in the market where product makers and I suppose retailers, to some extent, Amazon probably being the biggest amongst them, package things up in this way so that you're locked.
It's not uncommon for someone to come in and go, well, I've got Netflix, I've got Stan, I've got KO, I've got Paramount, I've got Amazon, I've got YouTube, I've got Spotify, I've got iTunes. And you think, well, you think about that, like think about how much all that adds up. You know, one's $20, one's $12, but extrapolate that out and that's a lot of, and they're effectively providing a very similar product, you know, so.
And going to the legislation that Erin mentioned before in the unfair trading practices, something that is folded into those measures are protections around subscription services, so that people aren't so detrimentally affected by lock-in subscription services. Now, the benefit of some of these subscription services is that they may be month to month, but I think it's the overarching consumer environment that says, I need to have all of these. So while these provisions in the new laws are meant to protect people who are stuck into these quite dangerous subscription services, a lot of the ones that are existing now are, same as I said, month to month. Something that I think that does affect consumer behaviours around subscription services is, as we was talking about, the need for these things. Going to your point that you raised earlier about the media, virality around, say, a negative player is really powerful. But so too is virality around the thing that I need to have. These drivers to consume are affecting people's spending habits, and it's increasing the environment of precarity. People have less money because they are enticed to spend more by the constant exposure to media.
Bring back lay-by, I say. Does that date me? I think so. I'm going to put a few of our questions to you, and then I want to wrap with what we should be doing. So where the big gaps are, and if you could wave a wand. And I know this is going to be a really tough challenge for you, Erin, given that you've got about 95 things that you would like to introduce. But some really great questions too. What would be the legal pathways to legally regulating prices and preventing price gouging? Back to the very beginning of our conversation, Tim. Is there a way? And I suppose that goes to some of the legislation that you're talking about too,
it is. I mean, I appreciate that question was put in terms of legal ways. It is very much a policy question. What do you want to do? How do you want to price cap? A good example is the new fuel regulations. Well, although I wouldn't say they're necessary regulations, they're in legislation now. Fuel retailers have to set a maximum daily fuel price cap. That is a self-regulated daily fuel price cap. That's not something that government sets, but the Victorian government and also other jurisdictions leave that price cap to the market. Retailers advertise their fuel price cap, and then they can't sell their fuel price during the day above that price cap. And also a benefit in Victoria is that prices can only go down from the fuel price cap during the day. So there are mechanisms that we can introduce, but it just depends on, well, how is it that you as a populace or as a legislator want to try and control those prices? That's a way.
I'm going to expose a different level of nerd here. In history, one of the first laws, we'll often know it for eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, it had price regulations effectively about how much interest you could charge someone for bushels of wheat. We know how to regulate prices. We can cap them. We've done them in so many different creative ways. I think one of the challenges we have is that governments in a lot of Western countries, they're so reliant on that competition will solve this narrative. We haven't regulated prices for many decades, but we know how to do it. We've been doing it for millennia. There are a lot of legal solutions here.
I think this is a very good one. Should we start growing our own food? Is the veggie patch the answer?
There's only so much space I have on the apartment roof, but When I used to grow my own chilies, they were the best chilies I ever had.
If only for the smugness I feel for my tomatoes, it's worth it.
How to professionally complain?
Professionally.
You've got skin in this game, Erin.
I am the professional complainer. Always politely, always directly. It's never the poor individual you're talking to whose fault it is. And if you can, look up those magic words. I'm going to escalate this to the Ombudsman, my consumer rights supply. If you know a little bit about the law and you can talk about it, it helps. But I feel like you do this all day as well.
Yeah, so I pose questions rather than accusations.
Okay.
So I'll always frame my complaint with questions. And I'll give you a really good example. I was in a dispute with one of Australia's prominent car financiers. The client of mine, the vehicle had been repossessed, they'd sold it, but there was a residual debt. He had a significant change of circumstances compared to when he actually applied for the finance. They still expected him to repay the residual debt. I approached them saying, this is his situation and there is no foreseeable change in his no improvement in his situation, so I applied for a debt waiver. To their credit, they came back and offered me a waiver, so they I think the residual debt was about $13,000, and they said, "Oh, we'll drop it to $5,000." So my initial response was to thank them very much for that and tell them how grateful we were. But then when I reiterated his financial position, I just quite clearly said, "Well, here's his statement of financial position. You can see it's evident here that there is no capacity to even pay back that $5,000. So before I take this back to my client to consider, can you please show me a way or show me how you can see him being able to make that payment?" And they replied and said the debt's waived.
So onus on them.
Yeah, so I do that a lot now. I'll put forward questions as to how they see my client being able to achieve the outcome they're looking for, and basically say, well, if that's the outcome you want, happy to go with it, but you need to show me how we can achieve it. When they realise they can't, you generally get the outcome you're looking for.
In the end, it becomes a trade-off around their effort too. Like, they'll continue to chase this, but to no effect, so cut your loss.
But you're also cooperating. Like, you don't want to attack and criticise. So it's just, we're all here to work together. So if we can do that, that'll be great. But if not, well, we need to get to a resolution. And I just like to make the resolution feel like it's their idea.
That, I think, is the essential skill of a professional complainer. Thank you for the masterclass, Josh. We're going to wrap in just a minute, but let's cast forward and think about, okay, what are the things that we really need to improve? We have behaviours, we have principles, and we still have, monopolistic and duopolistic environments. So given that dynamic, Tim, what would you wave your wand and create in consumer protection?
To circle back to something that we've spoken about a few times, the unfair trading practices legislation that is coming in it's pretty good. Something that we haven't necessarily spoken about much has been, say, in an environment of economic precarity, consumers become more vulnerable and some traders can become more predatory. That predatory behaviour can make consumers circumstantially vulnerable to greater exploitation. You need the service because you're in a precarious position, and a trader says, I want to exploit that. This legislation can help us do something about it.
How do people sleep? It bewilders me. Erin, where are we going?
All right, I could pick so many things, but for me, the big change I'd like to see is when something goes wrong with a product or service, it needs to be easier to fix that problem. I think there's a few technical things we need. There's no penalties for companies that breach your right to your refund, repair or replacement. We need penalties in all part of our consumer law. But also our complaints processes need to be consistent, easy to use, easy to understand, free, and actually encourage businesses to do the right thing before a complaint even starts. And we're missing that in a lot of the consumer space.
implementation
practical.
assist? Yes, practical. Josh?
For me, it's in my line of work, I probably think more education and awareness. I know I talk a lot about credit and debt because it's where I sit in a lot of what I do and my background, but I think more education and understanding around the implications of unsecured credit, but also changes in behaviour, which will come as a result of education around before entering into a credit contract, understanding the effects it's going to have. A lot of people will look, and I was talking to Erin beforehand, like if you watch TV carefully, if you watch ads carefully, you'll see a lot of big businesses advertise the finance rate rather than the product now. You know, for Harvey Norman's a really good one of that. You know, you'll watch car manufacturers, Toyota, Nissan, they'll advertise their finance on how you can get into that new car at this low rate. So there are so
not the cost of the car,
no,
but the
no,
finance
the cost of
deal.
the finance. Yeah, that's right. And a lot of when you sit down and apply for finance, you'll get told the repayment. A lot of finance companies train their staff to not talk rate, but talk repayment. Yeah, I can afford that. Great, you can afford that. Let's go. So when you're sitting there thinking you can afford the repayment, I always urge people, look at your savings. So how often do you actually put that repayment away each month in savings? And if the answer is, well, I don't, can you really afford it? Because you're not saving it. So just that sort of, resisting unsecured debt for consumerism.
And does that education start at school? Where do we?
Well, I don't know. When I went to school, there was no finance subjects. No, none whatsoever. So yeah, I think it does start at school. So it's something I'd like to see improved. Yeah, and I understand, we talked about buy now, pay laters earlier on tonight, and I do understand and accept the desperation that some people are in when they are just priced out of life. But wherever possible, I just think twice before entering into credit for expenses that by and large are going to be reoccurring and ongoing.
Wise words. We're going to have to wrap it there, but thank you so much indeed for being with us. And can I ask you all to express your appreciation? Josh Barnes, Erin Turner and Tim Stargett. And also my great thanks to our VLF team that have brought this evening together, Vicky Doig, Diana Caputo, Rebecca Hicks and Zhigang Wei and Hugh MacDonald for the stats out of the Public Understanding of Law survey, and also to our very kind and effective Auslan interpreters. So thank you all for being with us. If you missed anything and if you'd like to see it again, it will be available online very soon, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Cheers.